Satan's number one agenda? To control and destroy. If you can control language and the words that people are using, how many of you know control the ways that they think? If you can control the way a person thinks, then you can control that person. If you can control language, you control thought. If you control thought, you control individuals. If you can control individuals, you can really control society. And the language of this movement is the language of control. I want to just give you a few examples of this. The language of inclusion. We want everyone to feel included. How many of you want everyone to feel included? Hopefully everybody does, right? The way that they mean this word included is important to discern. So for example, please use inclusive pronouns. The propaganda messaging is modify your language to help people feel respected and included. But the idea behind it is that by modifying pronouns and other basic language, we actually control the way you think about gender. So for instance, the phrase cisgender, which means me. I was a man, born in a man's body, and identified as a man. Already they won the battle just by making me say that. Cisgender, simply using the term, already accepts the premise that the male-female binary is an inadequate description of human beings. Do I need to say that again? Simply using the term cisgender already accepts the premise, their premise, that the male-female binary is an inadequate description of human beings. You've already given up the ground. You've already said, that the male-female binary is kind of an illusion, and in fact, there are a lot of other kinds of people, right? Their kind of illusory, confused view of reality is reality. Through language, we participate in the reality that they're attempting to create. The response to this language of inclusion is, okay, well, the truth is you include everyone except anyone who doesn't accept your alternate view of biological reality. So they're willing to accept anyone except anyone who doesn't agree with them. Of course we accept every single person. No child should ever feel excluded because they suffer from a confused self-understanding. Every measure should be taken to help this child accept reality. However, we will kindly refuse to accept your definition of inclusion. I'm not saying everybody needs to go out and get into a fight every time they're in that alternate reality that many of you now occupy. But I'm saying, to the extent that you're able to not participate in it, as a Christian, try not to participate in it. These are not black and white answers in many cases. It's going to take wisdom, I believe, for many of us, depending on our setting. So I just want to say that really clearly. Daniel and his friends refused to eat the king's table food. Esther became a queen and married to this guy and made a feast for him. There are core principles that we have to honor, but there might be different ways they get worked out that take wisdom and discernment. Number two, the language of affirmation. It's our duty to affirm people's self-identification. When they say this, what they mean is you need to affirm the reality and legitimacy of a person socially transitioning. So social transition would be no medical intervention. You just grow your hair out, or you just simply say, I could say I'm a girl. And you have to accept that and refer to me as she, her, or Zer. You have to affirm that. You also have to affirm hormonal medical transition, puberty blockers, testosterone treatment, estrogen treatment, or medical surgical transition, which is what Kurt was describing. It means affirming an ideology we believe actually does harm to a child, in particular any person, of course, but especially children, and fails to address the underlying issues at the root of their problem, which could be actual gender dysphoria. Actual gender dysphoria affects an infinitesimally small number of people. But there are people who I believe who have been socially conditioned to identify as gender fluid or gender non-binary. I think it was something like, it was either 400 or 4,000% increase of girls in Britain identifying as non-binary in a short 7-year period. Do you think that's actual real cases of gender dysphoria, or do you think maybe that social pressures have something to do with that? I want you to hear what affirmation means according to the Human Rights Campaign.
It's time to set the record straight on what gender-affirming care is and what gender-affirming care is not.
Gender-affirming care is age-appropriate care that is medically necessary for the well-being of many transgender and non-binary people who experience symptoms of gender dysphoria.
Gender dysphoria is distress that results from having one's gender identity not match one's sex assigned at birth.
Every major medical and mental health organization says that it is medically necessary to support people in affirming their gender identity.
That's more than 1.3 million doctors in the United States, including the American Medical Association and the American Academy of Pediatrics.
You should know that transition-related or gender-affirming care looks different for every transgender and non-binary person.
Parents, their kids, and their doctors make decisions together, and no medical interventions with permanent consequences happen until a person is old enough to give informed consent.
So what can gender-affirming care look like for young kids?
For most youth, transition is entirely social. It might be a new name, a new hairstyle, new clothing.
Therapists, parents, and healthcare providers work together to determine which changes to make at a given time that are in the best interest of the child.
None of this care is irreversible.
And for older youth and adults, gender transition is a personal process that can include changing clothes, names, and pronouns to fit a person's gender identity.
Some people take medication and some do not. Some adults have surgeries and others do not. How someone transitions is entirely their choice, to be made with their family and their doctor.
What about surgery? Surgery is only for people who can give mature, informed consent.
Also, there's no such thing as the surgery. Some people need to have various kinds of surgery that help to reduce the distress and discomfort they feel about their body.
Many people never have any surgery at all.
All gender-affirming care is age-appropriate, medically necessary, supported by all major medical associations, and in many cases, life-saving.
In order to live authentically, I needed to access care. I would not be a trans adult if I didn't have the support as a trans kid to receive the care that I deserve.
Transgender youth who have access to gender-affirming care have dramatically lower rates of depression and dramatically lower rates of suicide, lower rates than with non-transgender youth.
One of the most important things that I can say to all folks as a Black transgender woman is that believe us. Believe us when we tell you that we're experiencing distress or when we show you that we're experiencing distress. Believe us when we tell you about our gender identities when we feel safe enough to do so. And believe us when we say that we need gender-affirming care.
This is a quote from an article, "The world's largest pediatric gender clinic shut down due to poor evidence, risk of harm, and operational failures." Quote, "The UK's National Health Service will close the world's largest pediatric gender clinic, the Gender Identity Development Service in London, often known as Tavistock, after the NHS Trust, which houses it. An independent review condemned the clinic as, quote, not safe or viable long-term option, end quote, because its interventions are based on poor evidence and its model of care leaves young people at considerable risk of poor mental health. The clinic must close by spring 2023. This is another one from an article, academic journal article called Current Concerns About Gender-Affirming Therapy. Systematic reviews of evidence conducted by public health authorities in Finland, Sweden, and England concluded that the risk-benefit ratio of youth gender transition ranges from unknown to unfavorable. As a result, there's been a shift from gender-affirming care, which prioritizes access to medical interventions, to a more conservative approach that addresses psychiatric comorbidities. In other words, there are other underlying psychological issues going on that cause a child to think that they're in the wrong body. Psychiatric comorbidities, and psychotherapeutically explores the developmental etiology of the trans identity. In other words, this isn't normal. Let's go back in and look at how this develops. Debate about the safety and efficacy of quote-unquote gender-affirming care in the USA is only recently emerging. So the whole idea that the science is settled, that this is, what you're hearing is literally pure propaganda, globally and even within the United States. But that is the power of this movement. They have the power. What do they want? They want control. How do they control? They control by language. The language of protection, that's another key thing. It's better, and this is something you'll hear all the time, it's better to have a living trans son than a dead daughter. Quote from another article here, data from a new study shows that the beneficial effect of surgery for transgender people is so small that a clinic would have to perform as many as 49 gender-affirming surgeries before they could expect to prevent one additional person from seeking subsequent mental health treatment. The last piece is the language of virtue. Our only agenda is helping kids. We just want to help kids. All you really need to do is go to the source to understand what the movement really means and what they're really after. John Money was a founding father who pioneered modern gender ideology. And he had, to say the least, some very troubling views about gender and sexuality. For instance, if I were to see the case of a boy aged 10 or 11 who's intensely erotically attracted towards a man in his 20s or 30s, if the relationship is totally mutual, and if the bonding is genuinely totally mutual, then I would not call it pathological in any way. He was the first person in 1955 to use the word gender as opposed to sex, to draw a distinction between biological attributes and behavioral characteristics that differentiate males from females. He subsequently popularized terms like gender identity and even founded the first gender identity clinic at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore in the US in 1966. He, along with Alfred Kinsey, another notorious sexologist, literally put together the framework and the vocabulary of the video you just watched. They victimized children grossly. One of their treatments, John Money's treatment of two twins, in which he, without the boy's knowledge, when he was young, gave him a sex change operation. Both of the brothers committed suicide as adult men. And the language that experts today, present day experts use, these were brilliant thinkers who had a few problems. What does this version of affirmation and acceptance, protecting kids, really look like? I want to let someone who experienced it share that herself.
My name is Chloe Cole, and I am a detransitioner. Another way to put that would be, I used to believe that I was born in the wrong body, and the adults in my life whom I trusted affirmed my belief, and this caused me lifelong, irreversible harm. I speak to you today as a victim of one of the biggest medical scandals in the history of the United States of America. I speak to you in the hope that you will have the courage to bring the scandal to an end and ensure that other vulnerable teenagers, children, and young adults don't go through what I went through. At the age of 12, I began to experience what my medical team would later diagnose as gender dysphoria. I was well into an early puberty, and I was very uncomfortable with the changes that were happening to my body. I was intimidated by male attention, and when I told my parents that I felt like a boy, in retrospect, all I meant was that I hated puberty, that I wanted this newfound sexual attention to go away, that I looked up to my brothers a little bit more than I did to my sisters. I came out as transgender in a letter I sent on the dining room table. My parents were immediately concerned. They felt like they needed to get outside help from medical professionals, but this proved to be a mistake. It immediately set our entire family down a path of ideologically motivated deceit and coercion. The gender specialist I was taken to see told my parents that I needed to be put on puberty-blocking drugs right away. They asked my parents a simple question: would you rather have a dead daughter or a living transgender son? The choice was enough for my parents to let their guard down, and in retrospect, I can't blame them. This was the moment that we all became victims of so-called gender-affirming care. I was fast-tracked onto puberty blockers and then testosterone. The resulting menopausal-like hot flashes made focusing on school impossible. I still get joint pains and weird pops in my back, but they were far worse when I was on the blockers. A month later, when I was 13, I had my first testosterone injection. This caused permanent changes to my body. My voice will forever be deeper, my jawline sharper, my nose longer, my bone structure permanently masculinized, my Adam's apple more prominent, my fertility unknown. I look in the mirror sometimes and I feel like a monster. I had a double mastectomy at 15. They tested my amputated breast for cancer. And I was cancer-free, of course. I was perfectly healthy. There was nothing wrong with my still developing body or my breasts, other than that, as an insecure teenage girl, I felt awkward about it. After my breasts were taken away from me, the tissue was incinerated. Before I was able to legally drive, I had a huge part of my future womanhood taken from me. I will never be able to breastfeed. I struggle to look at myself in the mirror at times. I still struggle to this day with sexual dysfunction. And I have massive scars across my chest. And the skin grafts that they took of my nipples are weeping fluid today. And they were grafted into a more masculine positioning, they said. After surgery, my grades in school plummeted. Everything that I went through did nothing to address my underlying mental health issues that I had. And my doctors, with their theories on gender, thought that all my problems would go away as soon as I was surgically transformed into something that vaguely resembled a boy. Their theories were wrong. The drugs and surgeries changed my body, but they did not and could not change the basic reality that I am and forever will be a female. When my specialist first told my parents that they could have a dead daughter or a live transgender son, I wasn't suicidal. I was a happy child who struggled because she was different. However, at 16, after my surgery, I did become suicidal. I'm doing better now, but my parents almost got the dead daughter promised to them by my doctors. My doctors had almost created the very nightmare they said they were trying to avoid. So what message do I want to bring to American teenagers and their families? I didn't need to be lied to. I needed compassion. I needed to be loved. I needed to be given therapy to help me work through my issues, not affirm to my delusion that by transforming into a boy, it would solve all my problems. We need to stop telling 12-year-olds that they were born wrong, that they are right to reject their own bodies and feel uncomfortable with their own skin. We need to stop telling children that puberty is an option, that they can choose what kind of puberty they will go through, just so they can choose what clothes to wear or what music to listen to. Puberty is a rite of passage to adulthood, not a disease to be mitigated. Today, I should be at home with my family celebrating my 19th birthday, and instead I'm making a desperate plea to my elected representatives. Learn the lessons from other medical scandals like the opioid crisis, to recognize that doctors are human too, and sometimes they are wrong. My childhood was ruined along with thousands of detransitioners that I know through our networks. This needs to stop. You alone can stop it. Enough children have already been victimized by this barbaric pseudoscience. Please let me be your final warning. Thank you.
States that have put in place laws attempting to protect children, like Chloe, from that kind of experience are being called by our current president and his administration hateful and bigoted. They say gender and body parts are not related, but people need to modify their bodies to match their gender. If your gender is not related to your body, then why would you need to do radical surgical intervention to change your body to match your gender? Why would you want to take drugs never approved or tested for the purposes they're being used for? So that's one of the massive logical inconsistencies. Another one, sexual orientation is immutable. In other words, you're born gay or straight, bi. Gender identity is fluid. So break it down. Imagine you have a gay man who's straight, that's his sexual orientation, and he becomes a woman, therefore he's a trans woman, and he's attracted to men. Either he's a woman attracted to a man, therefore his sexual orientation is now changed, or he is not a woman, therefore his gender identity is not real. Either sexual orientation and gender cannot be changed, or sexual orientation can be changed and so can gender, or sexual orientation can be changed but gender cannot. Any one of those is a logical possibility, but only one is correct, the last one. The idea asserted by gender ideology is logically incoherent. It leads us to a place where a Supreme Court justice, most recent Supreme Court justice, answers questions this way.
Can you provide a definition for the word woman?
Can I provide a definition? No,
Yeah.
I can't.
You can't?
not in
Okay.
this context.
So you
I'm not a
believe the
biologist.
meaning of the word woman is so unclear and controversial that you can't give me a definition?
Senator, in my work as a judge, what I do is I address disputes. If there's a dispute about a definition, people make arguments, and I look at the
All right.
law and I decide. So I'm not.
The fact that you can't give me a straight answer about something as fundamental as what a woman is underscores the dangers of the kind of progressive education that we are hearing about.
That person's now sitting on the Supreme Court.